Stray is the brand new game from a studio called BlueTwelve that everyone has been talking about for the last week or so, and I think for obvious reasons. Having animals in your game is a pretty good way to invoke an emotional reaction out of a player. Like, at least 20 hours of my first playthrough of Final Fantasy 15 was just me riding around on the chocobos. And yes, I did shed a tear or two when Arthur's horse died in Red Dead Redemption 2. It seems like every few years or so we seem to get an animal-themed game that grabs everyone's attention, and not always for the same reasons. I mean, in 2014 we got the hilariously broken Goat Simulator that became instant YouTube Let's Play bait.
And welcome to my brand new 400-part series on Goat Simulator.
In 2016 we finally saw the release of Team Ico's The Last Guardian, a beautiful game that I feel no one really talks about anymore. There of course have been other games like Okami on PlayStation 2, and then more recent games like Untitled Goose Game and the fantastic shark simulator Maneater.
You, sir, are a fish.
Now, I feel like I say this all the time, but I wasn't planning on doing a video on Stray, mainly because for some reason I thought that the game was only on PS5 and Steam, and I don't have a PS5 or a particularly powerful PC. But recently I got the new PlayStation Plus upgrade, which is essentially just a Game Pass, and I saw Stray at the very top of the list and felt all kinds of stupid. So consider this my plug for the new PlayStation Plus. You can get Stray for free, at least at the time of writing. I went into Stray almost completely blind, having only seen a couple screenshots and knowing the basic premise. It was a game along the same lines as something like Journey or Brothers Two Sons, an emotionally driven experience that focuses on minimalist storytelling. So my first impressions with Stray were kind of what I expected. Yep, it's very adorable to play as a cat, and there's even a designated meow button, which gives you an achievement for doing it 100 times. The tutorial does a pretty good job at setting a tone as you journey through an abandoned looking area with a few other cats learning the controls. I was surprised that jumping is completely context sensitive, meaning you have to see a prompt on a ledge before you can jump up to it. This felt a little annoying at first, but after a while you do get used to just preemptively pressing jump when you're near edges.
Hi there, kitty.
After the initial incident where the cat gets separated from its friends, you then start moving through these very straightforward underground tunnels and narrow city-like streets, and it was here I started to get worried. The game was feeling very aggressively linear in its design. You moved straight forward across a few jumping platforms, solved a few simple puzzles which involved pushing things over to make new pathways, and there seemed to be no real reason to try and look for any hidden areas, because there weren't really any. I had a rough idea that Stray was likely to be around the same length as Journey, about 3 to 4 hours, and during these opening levels, to be honest, I was kinda thinking to myself,
Is this it?
not that what I was playing was bad in any way, it was definitely very cute seeing all the different ways I could make the cat interact with many of the various things in the environment, and I could tell this was a real passion project for the developers. Just with the amount of high praise I had seen, with some calling Stray their game of the year so far, I sort of wasn't getting it. Then you meet up with a little droid called B12 who talks to you and starts talking a little bit about the world your cat has fallen into and how to possibly reach the outside. And then you travel just a little bit further and end up in an area called the Slums, which is a fairly large, open-ended area that you're free to explore at your own leisure. Now you can talk to the robot inhabitants, some of who will talk about the world and others will give you quests. You can hop, skip and leap your way up buildings and across rooftops, find hidden collectibles like music sheets for a guitar playing robot, cause accidents with paint, and get your head stuck in a paper bag. It was here that the game finally clicked with me, and I, like many others it seems, fell in love with Stray.
Hey there, cat.
The game looks absolutely stunning running on the Unreal 4 engine, and running on a PS4 Pro I only encountered a few instances of slowdown. Stray has quite an attractive art style to it, as you can probably see, falling somewhere between stylized and realistic. All of the lighting work looks great and is very artistic, particularly later in the game where you enter a neon-lit cyberpunk area with lots of lights and puddles of water casting nice screen space reflections. The texture work is all of a high quality, and background details like grass and foliage all look great. The cat animates really nicely. The way it walks and jumps feels very natural to an actual cat, which is made all the more impressive by the fact it's been traditionally animated with no motion capture involved. As I alluded to earlier, there's lots of different ways the cat can interact with things, like it'll knock over piles of books when it jumps off them, or you can walk in front of one of the robots and actually trip them up, which is all very amusing. There was one oddity I noticed, and that's if you spin the camera when the cat goes up and down stairs, you can see that it's actually not stepping on each individual step, but it's not really a big deal. The soundtrack is also a nice accompaniment to the experience, with a very chill lo-fi electronic sound to it that helps set the mood of a lot of the locations in this dystopian looking world you explore. And the world itself is one of the things that took me most by surprise with Stray, in that it actually leans pretty heavily into its world building the further you get into it. It really starts trying to tell the story about what happened to humanity and why you're in this dystopian city underground. As, like I said earlier, I expected Stray to be more along the same lines as Journey, which didn't have any dialogue. There's even 2 references to Skyrim that I found.
Some may call this junk. Me, I call them treasures.
I used to be an adventurer like you, and I took an arrow in the knee.
The game actually becomes a bit more like Limbo or Inside in the second half. It kind of stops being so cute and gets a bit horrifying, particularly during one sequence where you have to navigate your way through what I'm assuming is a nest for these alien-like creatures called Zurks, that are a bit like the head crabs from Half-Life. The sequences involving the Zurks are mostly chase sequences, a bit like a Crash Bandicoot chase scene, and aren't too challenging so long as you're paying attention to where they're spawning in from and you move out of the way accordingly. Which ultimately is possibly the only real detracting aspect of Stray's gameplay. This is a very easy game, unless of course you're relatively new to gaming, and I only died once throughout the 6.5 hours it took me to beat the game. Since the platforming is all context sensitive, you don't have to worry about jumping physics or timing, unless of course it's in a chase scene. There are some stealth sections later in the game that are also incredibly forgiving, with a nice little reference to Metal Gear Solid in that you can hide in cardboard boxes, which actually makes a lot more sense than a man hiding in a cardboard box.
Scram, cat.
Most of the objectives you're given in the more open levels ultimately boil down to simple fetch quests, and I actually stumbled upon a few of the quest items that I needed later just by nature of the fact that I was thoroughly exploring whenever I reached a new area. I only got lost once looking for an NPC because I thought he was in a building that it turned out I wasn't meant to access at that point. A lot of the puzzles mostly revolve around finding a certain item for a switch or moving environmental objects around in order to create platforms to the next area, and it's pretty simple to figure out. But really, if my only gripe with the game is that it's a bit too easy, I think that ultimately it's a bit of a non-issue in the long run, and considering it's only $60, half the price of a regular game, or it's free if you upgrade to the new PlayStation Plus service. Naturally, like a lot of indie adventure games of this type, Stray does have an emotional ending, though it didn't hit me quite as hard as the end of Brothers 2 Sons or The Last Guardian, but it was a pretty satisfying conclusion nonetheless. It would have been kind of cool if you could have unlocked different skins for the cat when you finished the game to encourage replays, at least on consoles. If you're on PC, however, modders have already started creating new skins and models for the cat, so there's that to look forward to for PC players. And someone has also already started working on making a Stray mod for Doom. Because why not, I guess? Anyway, those are my thoughts on Stray. It's not quite a perfect game. It has a slightly slow start and it's a bit on the easy side in terms of challenge, but it's an experience that is highly polished and gets better and better as you make your way through it, so I would definitely recommend checking this one out. And I'm giving Stray a cute out of 10.
Cat?